and welcome to a special edition of Juno Dawson's lovely trans salon, especially for the Cursed is Queer Literary Festival. We so hoped by now that we would be back in the room and that we would be able once again to invite a live audience into a live venue somewhere in the South to meet with a bunch of LGBTQ plus people to talk about a wide range of books and poetry. As it is, I'm greeting you from my living room in Worthing. And for this edition of the lovely Trans Salon, I'm very, very excited to be joined by somebody that I consider to be a distant but loving friend. It's something, Jamie has been on my wish list for a really long time. And it occurs to me that in the 2-year history of Juno's lovely Trans Salon, Jamie is going to be our very first guest who identifies as non-binary. And I'm very aware that I don't want to put a bunch of pressure on you to be like the voice of your community. As somebody who has often been asked to be the voice of a community, it's not a thing. It's not a thing. So let me introduce them first of all. Jamie Windust is a polymath, is someone who is talented as a model, a writer, an activist, a editor, a publisher, dare we say it, influencer, a person with many, many strings to their bow. Welcome to the lovely Trans Salon, Jamie Windust.
Thank you very much. Clap, clap, clap.
Round of applause. Well, where are you coming from, Jamie?
I'm coming to you live from Wimbledon, home of Wimbledon, home of the tennis. A lovely day in South London, actually. It's doing all right. We're getting through it.
But where is your painting from? So to put that in context, I was much admiring Jamie's Instagram stories last week over whenever you post anything on the internet, people like, where's your crochet blanket from? Where's your cushion from? And people were giving you grief about your beautiful rainbow painting.
Yeah, honestly, I can only blame it on people having too much time on their hands. Do you know what I mean? People have got too much time. Like, no time. But yeah, I actually didn't mean to set this up like this. I remember I put this painting up, and the first time I sat down for a Zoom, I was like, goodness gracious, I'm a walking cliche.
And I'm really feeling it. It's like, it reminds me of Queen Amidala from Star Trek. Natalie Portman's ambitious hair in that first film.
Thank you. Ambitious hair. That's my next book. Ambitious hair.
Ambitious hair. Speaking of books, let's discuss In Their Shoes, which you can tell I've read really thoughtfully because it now has tiny post-it notes in. A sure sign that a book has been well loved. Now, what I'm going to do, Jamie, is I'm going to start with a really easy question, but it's going to be immediately followed by quite a difficult question.
Brilliant.
So the first one is to sort of tenderize you, as it were, and then we're going to get really into it. But first of all, can you just tell us, how did the book come about, please?
Yeah, so I have always been someone that writes about my life, whether or not that is published. For the majority of my life, that has not been in a published sense. And I just enjoy using social media at that time when I was like 17, 18 as a diary. And before that, I had been in a position where I was the only queer person, the only trans person in a very small town in Dorset. And I was using social media to essentially just talk about the mundanity of my day. And my wonderful publishers, Jessica Kingsley, saw this and were like, hey, would you like to come with us and come up with an idea for a lovely book? And I was like, go on then, why not? I'm aware that the book came about in quite a non-traditional sense. It was almost like a collaboration between us to formulate an idea rather than me slaving away and creating a proposal and, going through the traditional route, which I'm doing now. And I it's absolutely horrible. And yeah, that's how it came about. I had I was just really happy to be able to share part of my story and include things that I had never spoken about. I think that's what I loved about the book, is I was like, I'm not limited by characters per se. I'm not limited too much. I can just throw it on the page.
So what was the vision for the book between you and Jessica Kingsley? What is, you pitch it to me. What is the pitch?
Yeah, so the initial pitch and idea that they came to me was doing something very specific about a guide. They wanted me to provide like a guide for young teens who are going through finding out who they are with gender identity and coming to terms with being trans. And I was like, that's a great idea, but I was like, I just don't think I'm the right person for that, because I am only able to share my experience and also give advice from my specific circumstance. I'm not an expert per se on all of the intricacies and intersectionalities. I obviously can give advice, but I went back to them on this and I was like, look, I know I'm only 12 at this point, but I was like, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I just want to talk about my stories here. And if someone connects with them, that for me is brilliant. I'm in no position to tell people how to live their life. So yeah, that's how it came about. It's almost like a hybrid of those two ideas. And then the book was born.
The book was born. Can you give us a little taster from In Their Shoes, please?
I shall. Now I'm going to go right from the beginning, just because I'm lazy, but also because I think it sets the scene, and also I don't want to do spoilers.
No spoilers, no twists here.
No spoilers. So this is the very first chapter, called Someone Else's Shoes. I literally tried being in someone else's shoes once, and it wasn't the most comfortable experience. Probably because it meant that I had to wear flat shoes for more than 10 minutes, which is never a nice feeling. Too close to the ground. Too real. Every step you take is too close to the earth that supports us. Too close to the very thing that holds us steady. But also the thing that has the ability to collapse beneath us at any given moment, allowing us to fall to the center. Allowing us to empathize with similar feelings. That feeling of absorbing someone else's time. The shape that they have carved out for themselves, with you sliding on top, not necessarily fitting exactly, but being able to feel that time has passed there. That memories, birthdays, deaths, happiness, terror have all happened for this person in their shoes. But now you're wearing those shoes. You're in control of them, seeing the world from a fresh perspective. A perspective you might not know, and a perspective you might not like, but you're seeing it, and that's what's important.
Thank you very much. It is, I mean, the book, and it's my favorite thing, and it's not dissimilar to my very own The Gender Games as well, which is, it's a lovely story. It's a lovely mixture of rants and stories, which I think that's my sweet spot for any sort of nonfiction. It's, it's difficult, isn't it? Would you describe In Their Shoes as an autobiography?
I'm going to say no, and I think I still feel a bit funny about it when people describe it as a memoir, because, and again, a lot of the comments and critique, not that I necessarily take them all on board, but the criticisms and analysis of the book were that I am very young, and I personally, even when I was writing it, I was like, I don't feel like I'm writing my memoir. I feel like I'm just writing about a passage of time that was very formative. And for me, that's what's important, is that I was just taking a chunk of my life from like 13 to 21 and being like, I'm going to write about this. I guess it just happens to feel memoir-y because that is the only life at the moment that I've lived. Yeah.
I know exactly what you mean. I had to be dragged kicking and screaming to the word memoir when I was writing The Gender Games, and initially I wanted it to be a book of essays. And then I suddenly realized, oh my God, those essays are about your life. this is a memoir. And I was like, no, no. And I was like twice your age as well. So I was still kind of like, oh no, like people are going to think I think I'm Martine McCutcheon or something. And I wonder if that's the thing, which is it suggests you have lived and it suggests you're famous, neither of which I felt was true of my life. So I was kind of, it's difficult. So I share your reticence about the word memoir. And also, I think as well, and I hinted at this in the introduction as well, did you feel a wariness at sort of having to educate cisgender people, or like a responsibility or a weight of pressure regarding the education of cisgender readers?
Yeah, and I think so I started writing in 2019, and I was like at the very beginning, and at this point in my work as a writer and as an editor, I was like, I'd only been doing it for about a year, and I was like, I'm already bored of having to, I guess, change what I'm saying to appease a cis audience or a non-queer audience. So I was like, when I started writing, I made it very clear with Jessica Kingsley and with myself, essentially, that I was like, I'm going to write this for our community in the language that is not too explanatory or too, this word accessible. It's a very loaded word. And I was like, I understand that people that aren't trans potentially might read this book, but this book isn't for them in a way, which felt quite harsh to think, but I was like, this book isn't for them. They can obviously read it, and I implore them to read it. But yeah, it's like as Paula Akman on the front, it's a love letter to my trans and non-binary siblings. And if anyone else wants to come along with that, they have to be aware that they need to have a base of knowledge to get involved in that conversation.
And like you very eloquently say at one point in the book, you have Google. Your audience, anything they don't understand, they can Google. Like, would you like me to Google that for you? Has become shorthand for sort of so much, I think, in our community. Kind of, it is everything. Everything is but a single Google away. This is not the only thing you've written. You've said other things around this book as well. So, this book is a starting point. And if people are interested in other things that you have to say, Google it.
Google it. Go and find it. So we do enough free labor.
Exactly. And again, one of your other points is, which is, however, if we're being paid, happy to talk about anything. I will talk about my childhood if you pay me.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I'm gonna now read at you from your own work. This is weird, isn't it? But this is me getting to the more difficult question. Trans and non-binary people are often told that their lived experiences are this or that, black or white, male or female. There's no nuance in media depictions of our community. Often, non-binary people like myself are lost within the discussion. It's either trans women or trans men. No room at the inn for non-binary people. And I think you are absolutely correct. And I think it's for a couple of reasons. I think things are so unpleasant in the world for trans people that the understanding of trans lives in the mainstream is so basic that if you try to get, and I'm going to use my mum because it feels like it's fine to throw her under the bus. Like if you try to get my mum, a 65-year-old working class woman from the outskirts of Bradford, to understand trans issues, you really can't go much further than born in the wrong body. And it feels like, particularly in the United Kingdom, we really haven't moved past born in the wrong body. And I find that incredibly limiting as one of the most binary transgender people in the existence of the transness. Like, for me, it was so easy. Like, hey, small child, do you want to be a boy or a girl? I want to be a girl. Sorted. And I think for non-binary people, it's kind of, if we can't even get past born in the wrong body than kind of understanding of non-binary stuff. It's a million miles away. And I've even seen, trans people, the very sort of binary trans people, I'm not going to name any names, but I think we can think of some who often pop up on morning television who are really ready and quick to throw non-binary people under the bus because, it kind of, I don't even want to say it confuses the issue because how hard can it possibly be? But because because it's more complex and more nuanced than born in the wrong body, those very, dare I say it, basic trans people aren't even willing to have the conversation about non-binary lives. And in this book, you mention a hate group. I'm not going to give them any oxygen at my lovely trans salon. Thank you very much. But it breaks my heart when I see trans men and trans women distancing themselves from non-binary people in the same way that hate group has tried to distance gay and lesbian people from trans people. There is nothing more poisonous to our community than division, I think. And similarly, I'm really aware that I don't want to use your time for you to come along and sort of explain what it is to be non-binary, because again, you can Google it. But what I found really interesting about In Their Shoes is your division of gender expression, which you describe in quite a lot of detail in the book, and gender identity, which you describe less. Now, was that because you felt you don't owe anyone an explanation or a justification of your gender identity? I told you it was a difficult question. You were warned.
I think for me, the gender expression and gender identity split, it relates to what I said before about age and lived experience and how long I've lived and felt comfortable as a trans person. And I think if I'm honest, I'm still coming to terms with what gender identity means for me. I feel very comfortable in who I am now, but it's a very difficult thing to define, especially if someone wants to read it to understand things. You can give a very layman's term description, which is fine, but it's different for everyone. And I think that's the point I wanted to get across. And I wanted to make the distinction between identity and expression because people really confuse that with me in terms of how I look. And they can't see past. They're looking, but they can't see. They're like, they can't understand what's happening. So I would say that I didn't want to give it too much airtime, because of like what you said. I didn't necessarily need to go into it. But also, I'm not an oracle.
It's a shame.
It is a shame, and it might come as a shock. But I've been speaking about this a lot more recently. I am just someone who is trans that shares their experiences. I genuinely don't know everything, and I don't claim to know everything. And I think the positions that we are sometimes put in make it seem like there is a lot of pressure for us to say, to know absolutely everything about gender identity, but who does? We just happen to be good at writing about it. We don't necessarily know everything. So I think that's why I got to a point where I was like, do you know what? If I don't know, I'm not going to try and fumble my way through here. I'm just going to say what I know, and other people can take what they want and leave the rest.
What is your opinion of those trans people who would seek to sort of slide a wedge between your sort of very traditional trans people who've gone down the medical route and non-binary people or trans people who may not opt to go down the medical route?
I think it falls into this idea that, after reading other resources and books this year and last year about the connection between gender nonconformity and non-binary identities and the deep colonial history and how that was erased, I think that it's, for me, when other trans people try and put that wedge in, it prompts the question, why? And the question then is, you see that actually a lot of this ideology isn't just singular. They're not just internally transphobic. They're also very conservative. They're right-wing. They're racist. They're potentially anti-Semitic, you know, they are anti-immigration. They have all of these things play into this idea when people, certain trans people can't grasp non-binary identities. And I think that's why it's not just a bad case of internalized transphobia. It's because they're bigots on, on all angles, and that's a bold claim.
But no, I mean, being trans doesn't preclude you from being a Tory. I mean,
Yeah,
it baffles me, like, mind blown. But, and it's all, there will be people watching this now who are like, why are they getting political? And I'm like, well, because we're two trans people. Our lives are political. So it's kind of like, well, welcome to our world. It is inherently political. We talked a long time ago for my next nonfiction book, which is called What's the Tea? And I did, with my little proby spoon, dig into your childhood. Creepy. Scraping away at your outer shell. And we talked about the point in What's the Tea where you realise that it wasn't just about gender expression. Because, I mean, you could have gone through your life looking the amazing way that you look. I mean, I'm so glad you can see this, but I would heartily encourage you to Google Jamie's looks from the archives, which are always sick. I mean, you could have, and I mean, I'm always very keen to say this to people as well, like even the Piers Morgans of this world, kind of like, you can look however you want, and it doesn't need to say anything about your identity. But at what point for you in your life did you realise that it was more than just gender expression, that it was about who you are?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that first point is exactly what I've loved seeing the response from the book is people who aren't trans, people who are actually very, feel very restricted from the binary ways in which they feel they should express their gender identity, being like, it's made me not care as much. And it's like, great, I'm not, that's exactly what I love hearing, is that people can just relax a bit more. And not question their identity if they don't feel they want to. For me, I always felt like there was a position with gender expression where there felt like a block or like a question mark. I was like, there's something here that I don't know yet. And I didn't have the language to know. And it only took me moving to university, moving to London, to actually begin to immerse myself in creative people, the queer community, and annoyingly social media, actually finding just these language like non-binary being used for the first time. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of the word. I identify with it. I don't have like a huge affiliation with it. It's just sometimes labels are good because they can help you find your people. It doesn't mean that you love all the other aspects about having a label. So yeah, that was how I kind of realized, because I'd always been like, I love wearing all of these clothes and makeup, but when someone would call me male or call me a guy or whatever, I was just like, I was like, I don't vibe that, but I didn't have the language to say, this is what I am, because I knew also, I was like, I don't want to be a woman. So I was like, yeah. And then ironically it was Twitter, which looking back is hilarious.
Love that. But that's, I think, our detractors again tell it, would have us believe that any sort of trans identity is incredibly newfangled. I don't think that's true at all. I just think that the internet brought us together. It joined millions of dots all over the world. Had I not, even, in fact, that's like, even when I moved to Brighton in the early noughties, I knew very, very few trans people. And even my downstairs neighbour was a much older transgender woman. So I still didn't connect my experience with her experience, because she kind of looked like a nana. And I was like, well, I don't think I'm a nana. And so it still took me another sort of 7 or 8 years to kind of figure out what was going on. But what did expand within those 7 or 8 years was the internet, and I got to know other trans people through the internet. So I think our experience is quite similar in that regard.
Right.
Oh, yeah, but I love in What's the Tea, you talk about just it being a euphoric moment and about that sort of like that sense of finding your tribe and matching with other people. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, definitely. And I think I remember the first time on social media where I'd see people that were doing exactly what I'd wanted to do, but were just embodying it, we're just being it, we're just living it. And that is actually what put me in a position to be like, do you know what? I need to do this. It's not about like there's a desire there, there's a want, but like I need to do this. And seeing other people be euphoric in their gender identity and expression almost gave me permission to also be like, I can get there if I want to, and I can do that. It was difficult, euphoria is something that I guess if you were to look at it in a binary sense, there's always the opposite of that euphoria, and that's definitely true.
Dysphoria.
Yeah.
Together till the end.
Loreen.
Come through.
But yeah, it's I found it interesting because I'm not a nightlife kind of person. I didn't have that experience in London that I think a lot of people have, where they find their people in nightlife and queerness in nightlife. I found it through social media. I found it through reading, through just other ways that I was engaging with trans people in the media, rather than necessarily a physical community.
Although I do remember literally walking into you on the South Bank one afternoon. That was the first time we met. I was like, well, look at this, people in the internet are real.
Yeah.
They're real people.
I remember that. That was yeah, I remember that.
I love that about London, though. I love that in a city so big, you can literally walk slap bang into people you really admire off the internet. That's what a place.
I know, it's hilarious. I'm sure it's the same down in Brighton.
Somewhat, yeah, because I mean there's such like some in the time of recording, RuPaul's Drag Race season 2 is on, and I got to know Joe Black and a lot of the sort of like the House of Grand Parade lot just from out and about. And again, I'm so old now. I'm not out of an evening in the way that I used to be a long, long time ago. So it's just run into people in coffee shops. So who were your role models and who still are your role models?
I guess when I was younger, I saw role models like Julian Clary, people who, and for me, my role models weren't necessarily, and this is no shades to Julian, but people that were just like physically embodying what I wanted to look like. So people like Julian Clary, and I grew up in the age of like the very first time I saw like beauty influencers that weren't just women. So like Patrick Starr, people that embodied kind of femininity in a way that I'd not seen before, and like Miles J, and people online that were just being themselves. And I remember just looking back now, I was transfixed by these people, but I remember not knowing why. Just being like, I don't really understand why I love these people, but I do. And Julian specifically, I just really enjoyed the way, and I still try and embody it now, is that he's very funny and he leans into that. He's not taking the mick out of himself necessarily. He's almost doing it and owning it. He's not allowing other people to do it to him, which I like. But in terms of transness, I think Janet Mock for me in recent years has really been a role model.
Absolutely.
Just because I'm in a position now where I want to be able to embody in my work what I actually just love doing, rather than it being super trans specific. And I think with her work as a director, as a producer, just for me is a real kind of light into that world of like, you don't have to just tell trans stories. You can be brilliant at your job and you just happen to be trans.
For me, with Janet, it's about her power. And I mean this when I say I think she's the most powerful trans person on earth. And I think very often, especially with sort of trans feminine people, we are very much models, actors. We are quite visual commodities. And I think for Janet Mock, a woman as beautiful, undeniably she is, to actually put herself on the other side of the camera is a mood. And, you know, she is setting the narrative. And it's so funny because, you know, had you asked me 5 years ago, you know, which, you know, what would you want to be? You know, I would have still said, oh my God, you know, I would love to do more acting. And actually having done a bit of acting now, I'm like, oh no, this is not the way to tell a story. The way to tell a story is to write it.
Right.
And,
What
and
did
that's
I saw you in something the other day. My mind's going blank.
in I May Destroy You.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah. So little bits and bobs, and I've got some more acting coming up as well, but that's all for another time.
Clown.
Because now, I mean, because also the segue into that one is, and I know how I feel, and I ask this question a lot because it's a question I get asked, and so I'm almost trying to steal other people's answers. Is now you are a role model. I mean, we can all say I'm not, but you are, because people look to you. And, you know, again, there are very, very few non-binary people have been able to get any sort of oxygen in the mainstream media. And you are one of them. You were one of probably about 5 non-binary people who've managed to get a foothold in the British media. So how do you feel? Is that something you're comfortable with?
When I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and I spoke about it last week, in January, about the ways in which, if you are marginalized, and I think in this, you know, my circumstance, it's being queer and non-binary, but if you are marginalized in any way and you enter an industry like the media, it is so easy for you to then just continue a career that is based on expectations from other people, or it's based upon sharing your experience and then constantly being thought of as having to do that. And you know, when I first started this job as a writer, I was just left uni. I was unemployed, and I was like, do you know what? I'm going to try my hardest to give this a go. So I just said yes to everything, and I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I'll do that. And you know, for lots of reasons, financial security, because I literally was trying to be freelance straight up. I had no idea really what I was doing. But what happened with that is I ended up just saying yes to a lot of things that, looking back on, I wouldn't say yes to now, because they were very basic. They essentially sanitized my existence into either a conversation about allyship or a conversation about what it means to be trans. And that's almost why I wanted to write the book, because I was like, so many people can't wrap their heads around this, and to save me and other non-binary and trans people to have to continually do this work, I'm just going to put this out there so that if anyone wants it, they can read it and hopefully understand a bit more. But as a role model, I still struggle with that. I if I'm honest, I find it difficult to not feel the pressure with that. And especially with the activist, I was thinking recently, I've never self-defined myself as an activist. It's something that people have placed upon me, which again then leads to expectation. Yeah, I did campaigning, and I've done things that, you know, you could explain away as activism, and I did fall into the circumstance of accepting that label, because I was like, sure, okay, fine. But now I politely reject it, because it just feels too specific. It's too it doesn't allow me to breathe. I don't think it doesn't allow me to just do what I want.
I think activist is one of the most dehumanizing labels out there at the moment, which is, you know, if you have a person from a minority background or a marginalized background, you know, making a point, it's so easy to dismiss it as, oh, noisy activism. And I think it sits really, I think there's a real turn of sort of like misogyny to it as well. Like it comes with aggressive, bossy, assertive, arrogant. And I think it's, you know, labeling somebody an activist is the best way to shut their opinion down completely. It's almost like, oh, who is this yappy little terrier coming on television to tell us about being trans? And I'm not like a transgender activist. I'm just saying I would really like to be able to go to the cinema. And if you don't let me use the bathroom, I can't go to the cinema. I'm not like a cinema activist or a urine activist. I'm just a person who sometimes has to urinate. And that's why it's really important that we talk about bathrooms because I'm not here as an activist. And so I am fully with you. And it's so funny. I remember, the first and one of the very few times I was labelled an activist was when I did Good Morning Britain, which, I wouldn't do now. Very much like you, I would be much more discerning with the invites. I think I did Good Morning Britain in 2016. And why would you do that to yourself? And it was when my name popped up and it said transgender activist. I was like, what? No one's paying me to be a transgender activist.
Exactly. And I think for me as well, I acknowledge that to exist in a space where there are actual people that do grassroots work, activism, who put themselves out there and deserve that title, who am I to sit here and have that label put upon me and then kind of just feel uncomfortable with it? I felt like I needed to say, this is not who I am. This is not what I want to do. Here are some other amazing people that are activists that you can get involved with, because, like you said earlier, non-binary people it's difficult for us to get into the mainstream media. However, I have a lot of privilege in that space, so I have been able to access the media a lot faster and potentially more opportunity because of my whiteness and because of my palatability as someone that isn't too wild, and I've there's no need for me to take up that much space in these activist conversations for many reasons, but that is quite a main one for me.
Let's talk about maybe one of the biggest things you do, because the flip side of having a platform and with increasing platform is you come with increased visibility. And I think possibly you were most visible when you did your TEDx London Women talk, which must have been terrifying. But you immediately say that the clapback, even while you were in the building. So I'm just going to hold the book up again in case people have forgotten what we're talking about. You say that even after you'd come off stage from giving what must have been an incredibly nerve-wracking speech, that there was almost like an instant clapback. So what was that like? Was there a second clapback online as well?
Yeah, that's been really difficult. And that experience with TED was honestly one of just, still to this day, and I still work with them really closely, it was just an incredibly nourishing, thought-provoking 4 or 5 months, because there's so much work that goes into things like that. You start in the summer and you get to December and you deliver that talk. I think that's why I was so frustrated with the clapback, because my talk was about essentially a very pointed call to arms, because we were a couple of months after the hate group was born. We were in a situation where transphobic media was constantly increasing, and I wanted to talk about it, and I did. And what happened was the clapback from people in the audience was predominantly from men, actually, but to be honest, just cis men and women being like, I understand what you said, I don't understand what you mean about allyship. I think people often want a very tangible, like, step by step. And then they would also be like, I love your lipstick as well. So they would come up and be like, you look amazing, but I really don't understand what you're talking about. Which I was just, because it's so much work to do that, and then to come off stage, have that just like absolute elation, and then for people to just not understand, that was really difficult. But I'm returning to TED in the beginning of February, to essentially address that. I'm doing an In Conversation with another former speaker called Ben Hurst, who also had a similar reaction, because he is a cis guy, and he was asked to speak, and he had a very kind of confrontational reaction to being in that space. And we're going back essentially to talk about why those reactions were awful.
It's sort of you talk about towards the end of the book, you talk about sort of transphobia, and I think for me, the bit that stood out one moment, there's a quote from Alok which says, "I'm sorry, the only way we've been taught to heal is to hurt." and this awful, and it really sort of, I mean, I'm going to use the internet word. I was triggered because it's been said to me as well, which is well, what do you expect if you look like that? You've got stars all over your face and blush up to your temples. What are you actually thinking is going to happen when you leave the house? Is something that I'm asked constantly from trans people, cis people, any bloody person who wants will ask it. And that's, that's so hurtful to almost blame you for the transphobia you are experiencing. And I think that's something that a lot of gender non-conforming people, because I think a lot of this stuff is experienced by cis gay men and cis gay women as well, which is that, well, what do you expect? If you're going to wear that leather harness, if you're going to cut your hair and wear dungarees, if you are going to, and that's something that I found really interesting about your book, which is the blaming trans people for the bigotry we experience.
Yeah, it's complete gaslighting. And I think it's still, I wanted to acknowledge that because it's such a difficult thing to address, and it's also a difficult thing to internalize, because in my experience, what that feeling, when someone says things like that to you and blames you for the prejudice that is brought to your door, you only internalize that as internalized transphobia, or you blame yourself and you strip it back. And that is why, I write about, there was a long period of time where I just completely took everything off. And I think that was really important for me to write about. And that was one of the only moments in the book that I was experiencing as I was writing, because that happened during the process of the book. And yeah, I still struggle with it. I still definitely struggle with it, and it's something that is horrible to have. People basically telling you that they're basically telling you deserve what's happening to you because you look however you look.
But that links so closely to, and again, this notion that we can separate feminism from trans women, because of course, since time immemorial, women have been blamed for their own assault because of the way they look. Your skirt is too short. You looked like a slut, and here we still are. If trans and non-binary people being told, oh, well, if you didn't dress this way, oh, you had it coming, and if only there were a magical word for this. And it's feminism. That's what we need. And you do write about allyship, and about how sort of like again, we're not here to teach you how to be compassionate, but it does, right at the very top of the book, you talk about how we are living in desperately unkind years. Like, we have a massive drought in terms of compassion.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I read an amazing book this year from Henry James Garrett called This Book Will Make You Kinder, which really tackled that idea about empathy. It really made me think about a lot of these conversations we have around allyship and empathy. If people cannot, and again, it relates to what I said about my response to the TED Talk, is if people cannot like tangibly feel like they have tools to be able to go into a situation and be an ally, they won't do it. And they also won't do it because they think it's like a ladder that they'll reach the top and they'll be like, right, I'm an official ally. It's a constant set of behaviors and actions. It's not a job role. And I think that's what people struggle with. And also, we are in very difficult times. People are also quite rightly sometimes focusing on their situation, but that should not be a hindrance to you to think, okay, if I've got it bad and this is the privilege I have, how do other people have it? And then to help them. We're living through, what is it? Unprecedented times.
Unprecedented.
Juno.
It is. It's been briefly mentioned, yeah. But I like as well, it's something that I think, there's a brief bit in the book where you say the children are the future. And, it seems encouraging, and I'm encouraged in the way that you're encouraged, that when we come to conversations around politics, around global warming, around COVID, around socialism, but it seems to be there is a young cohort of teenagers coming up who have a different worldview because we are living through unprecedented times. And how could you, as a 16 or 17-year-old growing up now, not recognize that we are in an emergency and that the world has to change and the world has to change fast? So I too take hope. And what struck me about the book, and I think this is quite sad, is, and I'm interested to know whether you agree, that it feels like your highest moments, your moments where you have really felt like you are winning, are very often met almost immediately by the real low moments. And I'm thinking about, so one of the things that I loved was the joy you found from the makeup counter in the department store in Dorset where you worked. Can you tell us about that, and how something that should have been really triumphant very quickly became quite shit, actually?
Yeah, definitely. So that was I had a message actually from someone the other day who still works there, and she was like, "I've just bought it," and I was like, "Don't read it." Um, that was a really exciting. That's the thing, like you say, it's real highs and then real lows, because I remember being so excited about, being able to play with makeup every weekend
So
and
set the scene. Tell us about this department store.
sure. So I was 15, 16, and I had just got a job in the local department store, the one that kind of smells like mold and dust, and has like Bayliss and Harding everywhere. Um, and I was given a position on the menswear counter, which was fine. I enjoyed at this time a suited and booted style. And I would kind of go to work, and then every weekend I would kind of just walk over to the makeup counters a bit more, have a look, speak to the dazzling women on the counters. Um, and that's where I started my exploration with it. And then I would, wear it to work, and I would all of these things. Um, and then one day my manager was just like, "You look fucking dreadful. Take it all off." Um, and I think that for me was a moment where I was aware what other people were thinking. I lived in rural Dorset. People were obviously like shocked when they came in to buy their socks and pants, but I genuinely didn't care. And I think to have that like real immediate, like someone of authority at that point pulling you aside and being like, "You need to take this off," for me was a turning point, because it was my first moment of like, okay, this is the reaction that I'm getting here. And it lit a fire in me to not change it. So I did it in that instance, but the next day when I came in, I was still in the makeup.
Mm. And then they moved you onto the counter. So you did get your place on the makeup counter, but then you just found, again, with that increase in visibility came an increase in transphobia as well.
Yeah, so after I kind of hounded my manager to let me move over, she did. Yeah, I moved over, and then just the reaction to my presence in that space was just completely just overwhelming. I was 16, and just people just being absolutely vile. People from school coming in, people taking photos, like even some of the managers, it's like not happy about it and having to get security and all these things. And I was like, how can I have all of what? It's similar to what we said before. All of these problems that feel like they're my fault, but I'm actually having a lovely time in my head most of the time with how I look. I'm having a brilliant time. It's only when I'm then, like you say, exposed to higher levels of visibility that people make you doubt whether or not you should be doing what you're doing.
And it, it,
Yeah.
it is shocking. And this is, it's violence, but you say that, even staring can feel like violence. And I would thoroughly agree. I think we have slightly different experiences in that at the beginning of my transition, it was that the staring was the worst thing. And actually I was, again, we had quite similar but different as well experiences, where for my moment was on a train from Clapham Junction into London Waterloo, and I had the terrible misfortune of a stag do getting on my train carriage. And this was really, really early in my transition. And I'm sure they all thought it was hilarious to ask what was happening under my skirt. I found it less hilarious and more terrified for my life.
Yeah.
I, in that case, didn't call the police. I probably should have. I didn't. Was you had a not dissimilar experience with a group of drunk men, and you did engage with law enforcement. I mean, is that the answer? It's difficult to know, isn't it? And you do write about that very sort of, I mean, oh my God, having very quite wary, because as well, it's a bit like, why do you never see Hannah Montana and Miley Cyrus in the same room? It's because they're the same person. And those police, some of that stag do were probably policemen.
Right.
I wouldn't have been surprised.
And I think that situation for me was, like what you've just described with the train of people, that you almost become desensitized to it, but equally you are constantly hyper vigilant. So like, even, if I'm walking to get a train and I'm walking down and I look in and I'm like, okay, who's in there? I don't even think about it anymore. But when you actually explain it to someone and you're like, yeah, I'm looking for like a safe carriage, you're like, that's a lot to do all the time. So yeah, that situation with the drunk men, I did call law enforcement, and it didn't go anywhere. And every single time I have spoken to them, and I've written about this recently, is like you say, if you are asking an institution with bias involved in it, and no clear safety or no clear openness that you're going to feel accepted and listened to in that space, then it's very difficult to think that rating them is the right thing to do, especially if you are a person of color who is also trans. And I recently did some work with Gay Times about speaking to survivors and their experiences with reporting to the police, and all of them said to me, it's not, they didn't do it because they don't want to open that can of worms, or they did and it was absolutely, it was re-traumatizing.
Let's talk about that more, if we may. And so
Sure.
I'll sort of float out a sort of a trigger warning that we may end up talking about sort of sexual violence and sexual assault. Because one of the bits that I really liked in the book was actually the bit about dating. And I thought, for someone who is still under 25 years old, you write with a remarkable maturity about sort of dating in a way that I wish I'd been that switched on. I'd probably saved myself some heartache in my 20s. About your sort of, because dating as a trans and non-binary person is a minefield.
Mm.
Tell us about, I mean, I can't imagine Matt is their real name, but tell us a bit about Matt.
Do you know what? Matt is the only one that is their real name, and they actually supplied me. I asked them if I could include them, and they supplied me with like almost a synopsis of the relationship for me to just slide into the book. Yeah, that was interesting. That still to this day is my kind of only real trickle of a romance, and I find it very interesting that it was with a fellow non-binary person, and I think there are lots of positives to that. I didn't have to explain away my identity. I didn't have to feel like I was hiding anything. I wasn't scared that if they found out something, they could be shocked or violent. And that was great. There are also a lot of negatives. I think it's very common for two trans people, if you fancy each other or if you're friends or however, to almost bond through trauma. So there's like a trauma bond there rather than an actual romantic bond or a caring bond. But dating has never been something I have felt that I have accessibility to. It's either you are seen as a sexual object or you are unlovable. That's, in my experience, the very two stark moments
And
with it.
not to go therapist, but how does that make you feel?
No, I mean it's not. I mean it's not ideal, is it? And yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's something that I'm working on. Put it that way. But it leads to a lot of behavior that I think puts us in danger. And I don't think we realize, because sometimes we end up pursuing people or dating or being in relationships that aren't actually healthy for us, but we know what the alternative is like, and we know that sometimes we are deemed not lovable, so we grasp onto things even if they're toxic.
And I think that is, it's, and I've, through following people like India Moore on social media, that sort of, you've got to be so strong in yourself, and you've almost got to sort of constantly reaffirm your own value, because there is a real sense. Now, I have dated men who had the preconceived idea that I should be grateful for whatever I got, because, kind of like, do you know how lucky you are that I will meet you for a coffee? And that is a very difficult thing to not turn inwards and not to be like, oh my God, thank you so much for being seen in daylight hours with me. Thank you for your charity work. You can claim back tax on this donation, kind of. And that's, so in the end, you have to become, well, I had to become quite hard-faced, quite just like, you will see me in daylight hours or it's not going to happen.
Right.
Like, I am a powerful, best-selling author. You are lucky that I'm giving you an hour of my time, because, some organizations pay £2,500 for this time and you're not doing. So, that you kind of had to adopt almost like a Beyonce mentality to overcompensate for the schema that I think trans people are held in people's heads.
Yeah, definitely. And that even that in itself is tiring, because because you realize that not a lot of people have to do that. There's not everyone has that feeling towards relationships and dating. And what I still find difficult now is that we live in a world where the majority of people, if they are cis and straight, or even cis and queer, they can date quite easily. And I'm not sat here trying to find a bloody fiance, but I'm also just be like, I think we need to think about the conversations we have around dating a lot more, because there are lots of people in this world that just can't do it, and it's not their fault, and it's it's not my fault. I look great. What, come on, it's not my fault. But I've just decided to sack it off for the time being, to be honest.
Because your piece, when you wrote about your experience of assault over the summer last year, it was incredibly moving. And I don't want you to go into details now, because that's just reliving trauma, but about the sense of, for you, about the value of disclosure, I guess, and about knowing what to conceal and what to give up for public consumption, I guess. And I think the counterpoint in the book, In Their Shoes by Jamie Windust, is about the fact, for example, you don't talk about your parents. And that was something I didn't either. I felt my family is something that was not for public consumption. And yet I too was happy to talk about times when I was sexually assaulted. So, how do you know what is safe to put out there?
I think for me, with that piece for Gay Times specifically, was me being selfish, but in the nicest way possible. Maybe not selfish, but was me being kind to myself. Was me like, I had gone through a process where I realized that I wasn't going to get closure through the criminal justice system. I wasn't going to get closure personally with this other person. I had to find it for myself. And for me, that was being able to say what I wanted to say and have it listened to. That's all I wanted, because throughout the whole process, that didn't happen with the criminal justice system. So for me, my decision on whether or not I share things publicly, or if I don't, is based on, do I feel like I need to for my own closure or sanity or empowerment. If I do, then I decide what's the best way for that. But there is there is no need. I don't need to do that. Do you know what I mean? I decided to do that. I think that's the most important thing, is you should never be expected to just share your whole life. I came up with the idea to write that piece. My lovely editor at Gay Times, Lewis, was like, I'm going to fully support you through this. I could have not. And if you don't want to, you don't have to. Like I do with family. I don't feel the need to include them in a lot of my work because they're quite boring.
I liked this quote. This quote again sort of really struck a chord with me, which was for trans people, the statistics are hard to swallow. When we read about our own community in a very numerical and academic way, it can feel like we're having an out-of-body experience. And I completely agree with that. I know statistics about sort of mental health and trans people, homelessness and trans people, suicide and trans people, murder statistics and trans people. And it slightly feels like numbers. And I wonder if that's why there is still slightly this expectation on trans people at the moment that we will relive our trauma in a narrative way, as we've both done in books, because how else are we going to make those numbers meaningful?
Yeah, definitely. Because adding a human story to a number, like you say, it acts as help for someone. And that's, like I said earlier with the book, the majority of what I write is for trans people. And I might do it again in the future if I feel like there's something I really want to talk about. I think I can, and I think that's okay. I think there's often a fear that by doing things like that, you are feeding the system, and I think that's not true. I don't think that's necessarily true. If you feel like you're being made to write about this, or you feel like there's no other option to talk about your trauma, that's when you can wave your red flag. But for me, it's all about autonomy. If you want to do it, you should be able to do it.
And that brings us nicely to, I suppose, what is my last question, which is another section from the book reads, if we had to take a look at non-binary as being about stripping away the restricting ideal that you have to be male or female, we should also begin to apply that concept of fluidity to other aspects of our life, including our relationships with our friend and our family. We don't need to see only people we have a blood relation to as our family. And that was something that really struck a chord with me, because again, I think I truly became the person I was going to be when I made a family of girls in high school. And up until that point, I hadn't really known support, if I'm honest. And not to throw my biological family under the bus, but they were the first people to say, you can be you. That's fine. You don't need to apologize. Is that something that you experienced as well? This sense of, and I know it's become much talked about, but this sense of found family.
Yeah, definitely. And like my experience with my family was I described them in the book as Switzerland, which again my mum was very annoyed about. But that's just because when I was growing up, it's very different now, but when I was growing up, we just didn't talk about things. Things were just not discussed. I didn't talk, they didn't talk. I talk about coming out as non-binary in the book and how I did it on bloody Instagram because I couldn't be bothered to sit with them and talk because we didn't have that dynamic of just having open dialogue. So I found my people, but interestingly, my people weren't always queer. They were just my age, young, and a bit different. I have a lot of queer friends now, and I love that. And I have some brilliant trans friends that I class as my family. But what I found actually through writing the book is that acknowledging all of this history with my family and my parents made me almost feel sad or grieve for the time that was lost. because they're all right. They're all right. They're not. I'm privileged that they're not blazing bigots. They're just like the majority of people don't really understand a lot of things and needs to go on that journey. So actually, what I found is in the past year or so that I've actually been able to vocalize a lot of stuff with them. They've also learned a lot more, and it doesn't feel like emotional labor because it's growing a relationship. But yeah, that's the family.
Since the book came out, has the response from the people mentioned in the book, has it been surprising? I remember just after Gender Games came out, there was, and it was none of the people I expected. The most unexpected corners of people had an issue with what I'd written in that book. And I was a little bit taken aback. And I remember, I'm going to drop some massive names now, but I remember I was out before a ceremony thing with Caitlin Moran and Damien Barr, who had, of course, both written memoirs. And they sort of looked and were like, yep, could have told you about that, which is sort of this sort of strange response from within the family. Now, I never imagined that my transition would make me closer to my dad, but it did. But it was my mum who was pretty pissed off with some of the things I'd said in the book. Has there been any similar weird clapback from within your life?
There was yeah, I was worried about that too. So I said to, there's only one or two people that I shared the actual book with from my friends, but with family, I was like, you're gonna, like, I can't have your voice in my head whilst I'm writing or editing. I was like, you're just gonna have to bear the brunt and pick it up when it comes out. And we'll deal with it when that happens. There was no real problem with my immediate family. There was outer problem, like outer family, like step siblings, that kind of thing, that were very angry.
Really?
Why? I don't think I'm allowed to say.
Okay, that's fine.
But yeah, it's funny
because I'm shook about that, because there is nothing in this book. Although that said, I thought that about Gender Games, and my mum still found an issue with some ridiculous description of her hair. So I was like,
I guess off the record, a lot of the stories in the book are about them, but they've just been completely changed name.
Right.
Or some people don't exist in the book, and they weren't very happy about that.
Oh my God, you can't have it both ways.
Do you know what I mean? So
this is something I would say this to publishers listening and publishing people listening, which is when you sign people to write in an autobiographical way, I think there should be more of a responsibility on publishing houses to say, look, no one has ever released a memoir without upsetting somebody in their family. You need to know about this and you need to prepare for it.
Yeah, because it can get messy. Do you know what I mean? Like, for some people, it can get really messy. And there were moments when I was writing that I was like, I can't say that. And I was like, oh, but do you know what? I can. And I did. And I think because the writing process is often so solitary and so you're just in it, and I didn't let a lot of people see it, you only realize then when it comes out that what you're saying is not necessarily hurtful, but it's just quite shocking for some people. So yeah, definitely, I agree. Publishers need to have a better duty of care sometimes.
I was going to say duty of care is the absolute phrase. Because they want, it's a conflict of interest for them, because of course they want the juiciest stories. They want you to talk about, your wild affair with your Cub Scout leader or whatever. And it's kind of just like, yeah, but your mum was also married to the Cub Scout leader. So it's like, what are you going to do? That is not a true story. That is completely fictional. It didn't happen in my life. Oh my God, now it sounds like it did, and it didn't. Let's move on to the final question of this morning's event, which is, so I guess you have done, it's like, I sometimes think, especially if you have grown up somewhat online, it's like dog years, which is, in my head, I would have probably thought you were well into your 30s by now, because it feels like I've known you for a really long time. But it just actually, it's because you got started incredibly young. You were like a child prodigy. So what's next? What is there left to do? Are you going to go full Zoella and have like the Jamie Windust lifestyle brand? Well, like what's next?
Do you know what? What's next for me is I realized, although it was bloody hard, I realized I just love writing. And there are two kind of ways that I want to go this in the next few years. Is I want to write more. So I'm working on a second proposal at the moment that I'm very happy with, because at no point in it have I mentioned that I'm trans. Um, and that's not, I realized actually when I was looking at it the other day, I was like, I haven't even done this on purpose. It's just where I am now. Everything, everything we say, it's like when in your fiction, it's coming from a trans lens. It's coming from a trans head. So it's obviously going to have some sprinklings of transness, but it doesn't have to be focused. So that's my kind of wish for the moment. And then I just really love presenting, hosting, being able to facilitate other conversations. I worked with Jamila Jamil over summer and autumn last year
On I Way, yes.
with I Way, the wonderful I Way, with my series of the same name, in their shoes, because I wanted to create something visual from the book. I wanted to essentially say these are the themes of the book, and sit down with these wonderful guests like Courtney Act and Kenny Ethan Jones, and be like, how do you interpret this feeling of being in someone else's shoes? And I really enjoyed that. So I'm excited to do more of that. I'm hosting the TED event this year as well, which is wonderful. And just see what happens.
I would love to see you go back to your roots and go back to what I think from the book is maybe your first love, which is clothes. I think you write beautifully about clothing. And I think that's a skill, because clothing, it's a very visual thing. There is a reason that fashion magazines largely have pictures in. But I think actually writing about clothes in a beautiful way is a real skill. And I think you write about your love of clothing really, really well. And I think I would love to see you parlay into fashion somehow.
Thank you.
That would be my dream for Jamie Windust.
No, I do love a bit of fashion. I do, I studied it. That's my
Exactly.
experience.
We need to, as trans people, we have to be able to have expertise beyond our gender. And I think your expertise is in fashion.
Thank you very much. As is your, come on, look at this roll. I always appreciate a high roll neck.
Thank you. This is, well, I wasn't, we're sort of trying to do, I'm quite paranoid about COVID. So we're like doing this, like airing our flat in the morning. So if you catch us in the morning, our flat is about -6 degrees at the moment. So it really is, it's just about layers. So,
thank you, Juno.
Thank you. Thank you very much for coming to my lovely trans salon. With In Their Shoes, available now in all good bookshops from Jessica Kingsley Publishers. It's been really, really wonderful. And I quite like as well that it's sort of we haven't. I was really I didn't want this to become like a 60-minute explanation of what it means to be non-binary. Google it. Maybe that should be the final word on the matter. Google it. And thank you very, very much for coming on. And thank you very, very much to the audience. It's very weird for me to be doing this as a pre-record without having a Q&A and without being able to respond to the live audience down here in Brighton. You're all very, very much missed. But thank you very much for tuning in. I hope this session has cheered up your lockdown for the last hour. And stay tuned to Coast is Queer. There is a whole week of online sessions and events and talks and lectures for you to enjoy. So stay tuned, and thank you very, very much for joining us today.